80%. That's how much of Madagascar's wildlife exists nowhere else on Earth. Not in zoos, not in other countries, nowhere. Meaning if they disappear from Madagascar, they disappear from existence entirely. The island of Madagascar is located off the coast of Africa and is less than 0.4% of the world's land area. It contains more than 5% of all species on the planet, and 90% of those species are endemic, meaning they evolved here and only here over millions of years of isolation. However, Madagascar isn't just an island, it's a biological time capsule, a living laboratory of evolution, a place where life took paths it couldn't take anywhere else. And it's in serious trouble. To understand why Madagascar is so special, you have to go back to when it wasn't an island at all. About 88 million years ago, Madagascar was part of Gondwana, the massive southern supercontinent that also included Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, and India. All these landmasses were connected, sharing species, sharing ecosystems. Then Gondwana started breaking apart. Madagascar separated from Africa first, drifting away into the Indian Ocean. For a while, Madagascar was still connected to India, the two moving together eastward. Then, around 88 million years ago, it separated from India as well. And from that point on, for the last 88 million years, Madagascar has been completely isolated, cut off from every other major landmass, no land bridges connecting it to anywhere else. Animals that got here had to either fly, swim, or get incredibly lucky rafting on debris. This isolation created what scientists call a natural laboratory for evolution. Species here didn't have to compete with species from other continents. They didn't have predators or competitors arriving from elsewhere. They evolved in their own bubble, following their own rules. Over time, the island developed contrasting climates that created radically different ecosystems. The east coast gets hit by trade winds bringing moisture from the ocean, creating lush tropical rainforests. The west side, on the other hand, sits in a rain shadow, creating dry, thorny forests and the famous avenues of baobab trees. These contrasting environments push species to adapt in extreme and specialized ways. Of course, during the age of dinosaurs, Madagascar hosted some genuinely bizarre creatures. Majungasaurus, for example, was a large carnivorous predator that apparently practiced cannibalism, eating members of its own species when food was scarce. Repetosaurus, a massive long-necked herbivore, somehow thrived in Madagascar's seasonal environment. But the weirdest might have been Beelzebufo, the demon frog. This thing was the size of a beach ball, weighed up to 10 pounds, and had jaws powerful enough to eat small dinosaurs. Not tadpoles eating insects, a frog eating dinosaurs. Then the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, and the dinosaurs disappeared. However, Madagascar's isolation meant that what evolved next would be just as strange. Because in the absence of large predators, some species grew to incredible sizes. The epiornis, the elephant bird, 3 meters tall, weighing up to half a ton. It is, to date, the largest bird that ever lived. It couldn't fly, but it didn't need to because there were no large predators to threaten it. It laid eggs the size of rugby balls, over 150 times larger than a chicken egg. It has been said that a single elephant bird egg could make an omelet that would feed dozens of people. These birds had survived for millions of years. They lived through climate changes, volcanic eruptions, droughts, and ice ages on other continents. They were perfectly adapted to Madagascar's environment, perfectly suited to its forests and open areas. They had no natural predators. They were doing fine. Their population was stable. They had evolved alongside every other species on the island in a balanced ecosystem. And then humans arrived. Around 2,000 years ago, people came to Madagascar from Southeast Asia and Africa. They brought agriculture, they brought hunting tools, they brought fire. They found these massive flightless birds that had never learned to fear humans and had no defensive behaviors against tool-using predators. The eggs were enormous sources of protein, easy to collect. The birds themselves provided massive amounts of meat. So, within a few centuries, maybe even faster, the elephant birds were gone, completely extinct. along with giant lemurs the size of gorillas, pygmy hippos, giant tortoises, and numerous other species that had survived for millions of years. The primary method of clearing land was Tavy slash-and-burn agriculture. Cut down the forest, burn it, and plant crops in the ash-enriched soil. Then, when the soil depletes after a few years, move on and burn another section of forest. This was a practice then that still continues today, and with it, species that had survived for 80 million years, that had made it through mass extinctions and climate shifts, didn't survive a few centuries of human activity. That's the brutal timeline we're dealing with. Still, some species did survive, and they're extraordinary. The most iconic are the lemurs. Madagascar has over 100 species of lemurs. They arrived here around 50 to 60 million years ago, probably floating across from Africa on mats of vegetation after storms. That sounds impossible, but it's the best explanation we have. Once they got here, they diversified into every ecological niche you can imagine. Tree-dwelling lemurs, ground lemurs, tiny mouse lemurs that fit in your hand, and larger indri lemurs with distinctive calls that echo through the forest. They're primates like us, but they evolved in complete isolation from monkeys and apes. They took a completely different evolutionary path. Nonetheless, 95% of lemur species are now endangered. Some are even critically endangered, with only hundreds of individuals left in the wild. Then there's the fossa, Madagascar's top predator. It looks like a cat, but it's not a cat. It looks like a mongoose, but it's not really a mongoose either. It's its own thing, a unique carnivore that evolved here to fill the predator niche. It's incredibly agile, can climb trees as well as lemurs can, and it's one of the few animals that can catch adult lemurs. But the fossa is also threatened by deforestation and hunting, declining as its forest habitat shrinks. We must not forget the leaf-tailed gecko as well, a masterclass in camouflage and adaptation. The leaf-tailed gecko is essentially invisible when it presses against tree bark. Its skin mimics the texture and color so precisely that predators can walk right past it. Its tail looks exactly like a dead leaf. And chameleons. More than half of all chameleon species in the world live in Madagascar. We're talking about over 70 species, from tiny ones smaller than your fingernail to large ones the size of a house cat. They change color not primarily for camouflage but for communication and temperature regulation. Each species has adapted to specific microhabitats within the forest, but here's the crisis. More than 90% of Madagascar's original forests have disappeared. 90%. What remains is fragmented into isolated patches, separated by farmland and degraded land. This fragmentation breaks up habitats, separates populations, and collapses food chains. Also, when you remove the forest, the soil erodes. Madagascar's rivers currently run red with sediment washing into the ocean. The island is literally bleeding into the sea, which means species that need large territories or that migrate between areas can't survive in these isolated fragments. Populations will become too small to be genetically viable, but there is hope, not naive hope, but real efforts making real differences. Reforestation programs are working to restore degraded land and create corridors between forest fragments. These corridors will allow animals to move between habitats safely, increasing genetic diversity and access to resources. Also, ecotourism is providing economic incentives to protect rather than destroy forests. When communities can make a living from tourists coming to see lemurs and chameleons, they have a reason to keep the forest standing. It's not perfect, but it's creating value for conservation. On the other hand, scientists and NGOs are on the ground studying species, monitoring populations, and working with local communities to develop sustainable practices. They're creating protected areas, breeding programs for critically endangered species, and educational programs teaching why Madagascar's biodiversity matters. And they do this because they know that Madagascar is a time machine. They understand that walking through a Malagasy rainforest is like visiting Earth as it might have been 50 million years ago, when primates were just beginning to diversify, when isolated landmasses were creating their own evolutionary experiments. And they see how incredibly fragile it is. The elephant birds are gone, the giant lemurs are gone. Species we didn't even get to study or understand are gone, but there's still time to save what remains. The question is whether we value this evolutionary treasure enough to fight for it.